Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive.
Mm.
Have you ever picture the world's big powers, not just as countries, but as these kind of exclusive clubs?
Mm-hmm. Like with their own rules, their own agendas.
Exactly. Who gets in, who's kept out, and what are they, really trying to do on the world stage?
It's a great way to think about it.
Today, we're pulling back the curtain on that
Yeah.
whole intricate global network. All right, let's peel back the layers here. We're doing a deep dive, a really comprehensive one, into two of the most influential power blocks right now.
The big ones.
Yeah, the established G7 and then the rising BRICS group.
Mm.
And for this, you've sent us some, frankly, compelling sources. We've got detailed stuff from the Wall Street Journal looking behind the scenes of diplomacy.
Right.
We have analyses on India's really unique position in all this.
Which is fascinating in itself.
Totally. And even a very candid take directly from India's foreign minister. So this
Yeah.
isn't just theory, it's how power actually works.
And what's really striking, I think, is how these groups, they're not just about economic clout, right? They really reflect evolving geopolitical ambitions.
Okay.
So our mission today, it's kind of multi-layered. We want to trace their origins, understand what they do now, their roles.
Get into the internal stuff, too, the dynamics.
Absolutely. The internal dynamics are crucial. And then maybe most importantly, figure out what this all means for key countries, like India, obviously, but also, well, for you listening in.
Right. How does it connect?
We'll explore what makes them tick, where their interests line up, where they clash, and how all their interactions are, well, fundamentally reshaping the global landscape as we speak.
It sounds like a complex dance.
It is, but hopefully we can help make sense of the steps and the dancers.
Okay, so let's kick things off with the established club, G7.
Right.
Our sources, they describe it pretty meticulously. It's a group of seven. Well, seven of the world's most advanced economies.
Yeah, the heavy hitters. We're talking US, UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan. The traditional industrial powerhouses.
The ones who kind of shaped the post-war economic order.
Exactly. For decades, they were seen as the main architects, steering international policy, setting the agenda, kind of like the original global executive committee, if you will. And if you step back, look at the bigger picture, the G7 as we know it, it's been a major force for about, 50 years?
Half a century, wow.
Yeah, and primarily made up of the world's developed nations. That long history, it's definitely cemented its role, or at least its perceived role, as the leading global forum.
Like the Senior Council.
Sort of. For a long time, the expectation was, the G7 gets together, they tackle the big issues, guide economic policy, find consensus on crises.
That was the stage for the big problems.
Pretty much. It was seen as the place where the really tough global issues would get hashed out, debated, maybe even solved. Their collective economic weight, their democratic traditions.
Yeah.
It gave them a certain authority.
Moral and financial, you could say.
Definitely.
But, and this is where it gets really interesting, our sources paint a pretty stark picture of recent G7 summits.
Not smooth sailing.
Not at all. Facing significant hurdles, almost insurmountable ones sometimes. Some sources even called specific meetings failed summits.
Right. That term came up particularly around a summit in Canada. It was quite bluntly described that way by several commentators.
A failed summit. Why? What was going on?
Well, it highlighted a whole laundry list of really contentious issues that were plaguing the meeting and maybe pointing to something deeper going wrong within the group itself.
Okay.
Think about the timing. The world was grappling with multiple, really sensitive, entrenched conflicts. You had the Hamas-Israel situation in Gaza flaring up again.
Still ongoing, tragically.
Exactly. The brutal war in Ukraine between Russia.
Right.
And even those long simmering tensions between India and Pakistan were, always a background concern. These weren't small things. They were major global flashpoints demanding urgent, coordinated action.
And it wasn't just geopolitics, was it? The economic side seems shaky, too.
Absolutely. That whole issue of reciprocal tariffs, especially under the Trump administration's, let's say, aggressive trade stance, that loomed really large.
Yeah, I remember that period. Lots of tension.
Huge tension. And it wasn't just abstract economics. It was directly threatening global economic stability, creating uncertainty, triggering retaliation.
Between longtime allies, even.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The very principles of free trade the G7 was supposed to champion seemed to be under attack from within its own ranks. It cast a real shadow. And this internal friction, it wasn't just policy disagreements. It felt according to the sources, almost personal sometimes. It started to really erode the group's cohesion.
How so?
Well, U.S. foreign and trade policy at that time was seen by many as a major factor in the summit's struggles. For instance, there was a perception, right or wrong, that one U.S. president was leaning towards Russia regarding the Ukraine crisis.
Which would obviously cause issues within the G7.
Huge issues. It raised uncomfortable questions about neutrality, about collective resolve. How can the group function if a key member seems to be, undermining the collective stance, or takes a position that alienates an important guest, like the Ukrainian president who was invited?
You can feel the tension.
Palpable unease, yeah. And it led to this quite surprising suggestion to expand the G7 to G9.
G9. Who would they add?
Controversially, Russia and China.
Wow. That wouldn't fly, surely.
Predictably, it met with zero agreement from the others, especially, as I said, with the Ukrainian president right there seeking support. Imagine the awkwardness. It showed a fundamental disconnect about the group's direction, its purpose.
And the end of that summit didn't sound much better.
No, it just highlighted the divisions even more. The U.S. refused to sign the usual joint statement.
The communique?
Exactly. That document that normally shows a unified voice refused to criticize certain aggressive actions, wouldn't issue a collective call for peace. Instead, it singled out Iran for condemnation.
So no united front.
None. Instead of a strong declaration, the summit just ended with a summary from the chair. Diplomatically speaking, that's a big step back from the image of decisive leadership the G7 usually tries to project.
Signal they couldn't agree.
Precisely. A profound inability to find common ground on the biggest global challenges.
But maybe the most critical thing, based on our sources, a glaring omission.
Yeah, this was striking. Key urgent issues like terrorism, the escalating Israel-Iran tensions, the Hamas-Israel conflict we mentioned, even the India-Pakistan situation. Reportedly, they weren't really discussed.
Not discussed at all. But why? These are huge global concerns.
It's perplexing. Whether overlooked or deliberately sidelined, the sources suggest they weren't tackled head-on. India, for example, had apparently gone there hoping for a strong statement on terrorism, a major concern for them. It never happened, which obviously led to disappointment, frustration. It left India, and likely others, feeling the G7 wasn't addressing the core problems affecting them.
And the host country issues didn't help either, right?
No, that added to the sense of disarray. Canada itself was dealing with internal political changes, new government just sworn in.
A bit chaotic.
Yeah, and apparently the invitation to the Indian Prime Minister came very late. It just didn't foster an atmosphere of, unified purpose or effective problem solving. It painted a picture of a group struggling, which brings us back to that question. Was it a total failure?
Right. Was there anything positive?
Well, the sources give a nuanced view. While it definitely fell short on the big geopolitical crises, some leaders did point to, let's say, substantive discussions on emerging issues.
Like what?
Things like artificial intelligence, the ethics, the potential, quantum computing, critical supply chains for rare earth minerals, which are vital for tech.
Okay, future-focused stuff.
Exactly. Even collaborating on managing those huge forest fires we're seeing more of. These were seen as signs of partial success. They are important topics, no doubt. But the overwhelming consensus from the sources seems to be partially successful on these newer, maybe less contentious tech topics, but largely failed on the world's major, immediate geopolitical problems.
So struggling to balance the present and the future.
It seems that way. Struggling to adapt to the urgent crises while also trying to look ahead, leaving a gap in its perceived leadership role.
Okay, let's pivot now. Let's talk about the challenger. BRICS.
Right, the alternative voice.
It's presented explicitly that way, isn't it? An alternative from the developing world. Originally, Brazil, Russia, India, China.
And then South Africa joined a year later, adding that African dimension.
So it's this collection of major emerging economies basically saying we want a bigger voice.
Precisely. Seeking more influence, trying to balance the global scales of power. And the origin of the name itself, BRIC. It's quite interesting.
It wasn't political initially, was it?
Not at all. Coined by Jim O'Neill, a Goldman Sachs economist, it was purely an economic concept grouping these diverse, fast-growing economies. He saw their potential to dominate the 21st century.
Just an investment idea, almost.
Initially, yes. But what's fascinating is how in 2009, the leaders of those 4 countries decided to take that economic idea and deliberately turn it into a formal political and economic counterweight.
To challenge the West.
To challenge what they saw as Western hegemony, the existing global order. They saw themselves as rising powers, huge populations, growing economies, They recognize the power of uniting.
They wanted their own platform.
Exactly, to amplify their collective voice, state their views, and, yeah, challenge the status quo.
So why did they feel the need? If the G7 was there, why form a new club?
Well, our sources give a pretty direct answer from India's Foreign Minister, Jaishankar.
What did he say?
He put it quite bluntly, suggesting BRICS formed simply because there was another club called the G7, and you wouldn't let anybody else into that club.
That's pretty direct.
Very direct. He described it as a natural multiplication of these global clubs. Countries with growing standing, recognizing their weight, decide to create their own forum for more influence.
Makes sense. If you're excluded, you build your own table.
It's a very human, almost intuitive explanation of power dynamics. A desire for recognition, for agency on the world stage. And if you look at the scale of BRICS now, zooming out, it's colossal.
The numbers are big, right?
Staggering. They represent more than 40% of the entire world population.
40%. Over 3 billion people.
Exactly. Huge demographic footprint. And economically, they contribute almost a third of the world's GDP.
So not marginal players at all.
Not even close. A massive part of the global economy. And here's a crucial point from IMF data. The BRICS bloc, measured by purchasing power parity.
PBP, yeah. What money actually buys.
Right. By that measure, BRICS has already overtaken the G7 nations in their share of the global economy.
Already. Not projected, but now.
Now, it's a current reality. It underscores a fundamental, tangible shift in the global economic balance, a quiet revolution almost. And Goldman Sachs projections just reinforce that trend long term. They predict China surpassing the U.S. as the world's largest economy by 2050.
We hear that often.
And India climbing to number 3 globally. The incredible growth, especially of China and India, since BRICS formed in 2009, it's massively swelled the group's importance.
Their individual growth lifted the whole bloc.
Absolutely. Solidifying its position as a major force shaping the future economic order. Which leads to this interesting question about BRICS' structure. It's unique, isn't it?
Yeah, they're not neighbors, mostly. No shared history like, say, the EU.
Exactly. Unlike traditional blocs, often bound by geography, history, or deep economic ties, BRICS defies that. It brings together countries from completely different parts of the world.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, all over the map.
Right. South America, Eurasia, Asia, Africa. The common thread, as Minister Jaishankar observed, isn't a border or a past, but their status as big countries.
Rising powers.
Rising, or in Russia's case, perhaps already risen, coming together specifically to amplify their collective weight and push for a more multipolar world.
Not dominated by one power or bloc.
That's the core ambition. A rebalanced global stage where their voices are heard, their interests represented.
Okay, so we've got the foundations laid out. Let's dive into the dynamics now. Influence, ambitions, divisions. It's clear BRICS is trying to be the voice for emerging economies, right?
Oh, absolutely. And overtly challenging Western dominance. It's not subtle.
It's a core part of their identity.
It seems to be. And what's really fascinating now is this big push for expansion within BRICS.
Right. Lots of countries want in.
A staggering number. Sources say more than 40 countries, including heavyweights like Saudi Arabia and Iran, have shown interest. Over 20 have formally applied.
Wow. Significant interest. Why the rush?
Well, different motivations. Experts point to Beijing being particularly keen to enlarge BRICS rapidly.
China wants it bigger, faster. Why?
The thinking is it creates a larger, more robust alternative group to counter the U.S. and the West, especially with ongoing trade tensions and U.S. efforts to, diversify supply chains away from China.
Strength in numbers, basically. Counterbalancing.
That seems to be the strategy. And Russia, for its part, sees expansion as vital too. A way to gain more international allies, shore up support, especially after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Mitigate isolation.
Exactly. Gain diplomatic leverage. And when you look at who might join, Saudi Arabia is a really strong candidate.
Huge energy player, big economy in the Middle East.
And playing a bigger diplomatic role regionally too. Their inclusion would significantly boost BRICS' economic weight and geopolitical reach.
Who else?
Indonesia is another major contender, 4th largest population globally, crucial in areas like electrification, clean energy, EVs.
These aren't small additions.
Not at all. They're significant powers themselves. Adding them would dramatically increase BRICS' collective muscle and global influence, make it even more formidable.
So with all this interest, what's the big attraction? Why do countries want to join this club so badly?
The sources really point to one thing consistently: access to the bloc's new development bank, the NDB.
Ah, the BRICS Bank, like their own world
Oh.
bank.
Sort of, yeah. Founded in 2014, it's already approved over $30 billion in loans for development infrastructure projects.
Okay.
But what's really attractive, according to the sources, is that the loans often come with, let's say, more favorable terms. Fewer strings attached compared to the World Bank or IMF.
Less conditionality. That's appealing for developing nations.
Hugely appealing. Many have frustrations with traditional lenders. And furthermore, and this is a really big strategic move, the NDB actively aims to deepen the use of local currencies.
Instead of the U.S. dollar.
Exactly. For trade, for financing among BRICS nations and partners, it's a deliberate step towards de-dollarization.
Reducing reliance on the dollar.
Precisely. Fostering a more multipolar financial system. For potential members, it offers a path to maybe greater financial autonomy, less vulnerability to outside economic pressures.
But even with this push for expansion, there's not total agreement within BRICS itself, is there?
No, and that's a key tension. Our sources show China and Russia are really bullish, pushing for rapid expansion. But Brazil and India, they want a more measured, cautious approach.
Interesting. Why the hesitation from Brazil and India?
Well, the primary concern seems to be about the group's overall character. They worry it could lean too heavily autocratic if new members aren't vetted carefully.
They want to maintain some kind of balance.
Exactly. They're pushing for specific, rigorous requirements for admission to ensure a balance among members, prevent it from becoming, as one source put it, the autocratic G7.
So preserve its legitimacy.
I think so. As democracies, Brazil and India are conscious of the group's image and appeal. They seem to want a bloc that reflects a broader spectrum of governance, not just one type, prioritizing principle over just numbers.
And beyond expansion debates, what's the biggest hurdle for BRICS overall?
Probably forming a truly united voice on major global issues. That's the real test.
Agreeing on a bank is one thing. Agreeing on, say, how to handle a major war is another.
Entirely different. If you look at the bigger picture, the countries within BRICS have quite diverse interests, sometimes diverging interests.
In politics, security.
Even in their relationships with the U.S., India has strong ties with the U.S. China and Russia actively seek to counter U.S. influence. That makes finding common ground on complex global events incredibly difficult.
So it limits their ability to act as a unified political force.
It certainly challenges it. While they aim to be seen as this alternative political forum to the G7, their success really depends on overcoming these internal differences and, importantly, on who they decide to let in.
They don't always agree.
Far from it. Their positions can be quite different on critical issues. Pursuing a united front is a constant diplomatic effort. United by ambition, maybe, but often divided by specifics.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating, especially for our listeners interested in India. The sources consistently highlight India's position as, well, unique.
Truly unique. Often described as a geopolitical sweet spot.
What does that mean exactly? Sweet spot.
The sources frame it as a country navigating the world with issues but not conflicts. It cultivates friends but not rigid alliance commitments. It engages with rivals but doesn't make them outright enemies.
That sounds like the dream foreign policy position.
It's presented as the ultimate goal, yeah. A posture of incredible agility, autonomy, influence in this complex world.
Yeah.
And the sheer breadth of India's engagement is just striking. Our sources detail the Prime Minister's schedule in 1 year as an example. It's almost dizzying.
Give us a sense of.
Okay, so imagine. June, G7 summit in Italy, invited by the West. July, off to Russia, includes that notable hug with Putin, signaling independence.
Right, despite pressure.
August, visits Ukraine, expresses solidarity with Zelensky, engaging both sides. September, meets Biden in the U.S., attends the Quad Summit with Japan and Australia, key Indo-Pacific grouping.
Wow, covering all bases.
Then October, back to Russia for the BRICS Summit, reinforcing that commitment. Immediately after, hosting the German Chancellor in New Delhi.
That's relentless.
And it extends further, striking a border deal with China to ease tensions, talking with Israeli leaders, then meeting presidents of Palestine and Iran.
It's astonishing, engaging directly with adversaries, partners, everyone.
Exactly. The sources stress. Countries aren't just talking to India, they are actively seeking its support, its influence. This level of multi-directional engagement is extraordinary.
So how did India get here? How did it manage to carve out this sweet spot? The sources point to specific reasons, right?
Yes, 3 key interconnected factors emerge consistently.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, undeniably, it's economic rise. India is now the world's fifth largest GDP, most populous nation.
Over 1.4 billion people.
Makes it a huge attractive market for everyone. Exporters want access, and there's a strong desire globally to tap into India's young, skilled workforce. Its economic dynamism is a massive draw. Second factor, hard power.
Military strength.
Yes. Sources note India ranks fourth globally in firepower, and critically, it's a nuclear-armed state.
So a serious play.
A very serious player. That strength means other countries recognize it as a force to be reckoned with. They want India on their side, not against them. In this turbulent world, a powerful, stable, democratic India is seen as a valuable security partner. And the third factor...
The Indo-Pacific focus.
Exactly. As China's intentions to reshape the world order became clearer over the last decade or so.
Countries started looking for alternatives.
Precisely. Alternatives for supply chains, investments, security partnerships, a way to counterbalance, and India emerged as a very compelling option.
Why India specifically?
Because it offers that unique combination. A stable democracy, a rising economy, and crucially, a reputation as a peace-loving, non-interventionist country historically. This made it a cornerstone for Western Indo-Pacific strategies.
A key partner in balancing the region.
Absolutely. Seen as vital for maintaining a rules-based order, freedom of navigation, all of that.
So India's in this unique position. How does it actually use it? How does it leverage this sweet spot?
Well, it doesn't just sit there. The sources say India actively looks for gains from engaging with both sides, or multiple sides. And critically, it works to bridge the gaps between different global camps.
Not just balancing, but connecting.
Connecting, mediating, facilitating, acting as a bridge. We've seen concrete examples. Remember the G20 summit India hosted?
Yes.
India successfully lobbied to get the African Union included as a permanent member. That was highlighted as a major achievement.
Giving the Global South a bigger voice.
Exactly. A significant step towards more equitable representation, showcasing India's ability to build consensus. And it's offered to mediate in conflicts Ukraine, West Asia.
Positioning itself
as a broker without bias. That's the phrase used. Unlike countries with maybe more obvious vested interests, like China or the US perhaps, India's multi-directional engagement gives it a certain credibility.
Impartiality helps.
It's invaluable in peacemaking efforts, and this isn't just happening by chance, it's a deliberate strategy.
A conscious foreign policy choice.
Very much so. The Prime Minister has talked about India being a Vishwamitra,
Which means?
friend to the world, a profound concept. And the Foreign Minister expanded on it, stating India wants to be a bridging power.
So, more than just neutrality.
Way more. It's active engagement on all sides, as the sources put it. Consciously being a bridge between Russia and the West, Iran and Israel, BRICS and the G7.
And the goal?
To capitalize on this unique position for geopolitical dividends, to grow its influence in this complex world.
Okay, but let's circle back to the G7 for a moment. Given those perceived failures we talked about, the summits that didn't deliver, should India even bother participating? What's the real value for India?
That's the crucial calculation, isn't it? And the sources prompt us to look at both sides, the utility and the shortcomings.
The pros and cons.
Right. While it's true and frustrating for India that vital issues like terrorism weren't adequately addressed sometimes.
Which is a core concern for them.
Absolutely. But on the other hand, those discussions on AI, quantum computing, rare earths, those were seen as partially successful. And those are areas where India has a huge stake, a lot to contribute and a lot to gain.
So there's still value in being at that table.
It seems the assessment is, yes, there is value, but with eyes wide open. The nuanced view is G7 is partially successful on some future tech stuff, but often fails on the big, immediate geopolitical problems.
So India weighs the benefits of engagement on tech and with developed economies against the frustration of inaction on other key issues.
Exactly. It's a pragmatic calculation. Influence versus inertia, cost versus benefit. It informs their strategic approach and gauge, but don't expect miracles on every front.
All right, let's try and tie all this together. Let's unpack the bigger picture, this complex dance between the G7, BRICS, India's bridging role. What does it actually mean for you, the global citizen listening?
Yeah, how does this high-level geopolitics connect to everyday life? Well, stepping back, that fundamental economic shift we discussed, G7 towards BRICS, especially in PPP terms and future projections, that's not just numbers on a page. It signifies a real reshaping of the international order.
Power shifting.
Influence is shifting, new power centers are emerging, global narratives are evolving, and that has concrete implications for you.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, think about that push for de-dollarization by BRICS and the NDB. Over time, if more trade happens in local currencies, that could subtly affect the price of goods you buy from abroad,
Could make imports cheaper or more expensive.
potentially, or affect currency exchange rates when you travel. Think about manufacturing shifts towards BRICS nations could mean new products, maybe lower costs, but also maybe new job opportunities or competitive pressures in your own local economy.
So real economic ripples.
Absolutely. These aren't just abstract shifts. They sculpt global markets, investment flows, supply chains, things that ultimately impact your wallet, your community's economic health.
And that idea of clubs in international relations.
Yeah.
Why is that useful for us to understand?
Because it helps explain how nations organize themselves. As Minister Jaishankar described it, it's based on shared interests, collective ambition, sometimes perceived exclusion.
It's strategic grouping.
Exactly. Understanding those dynamics helps you see beyond the headlines, grasp the deeper currents of diplomacy, competition, cooperation. It's like knowing the rules of the game being played on the world stage.
Who the players are, what they want.
And how they interact. That knowledge empowers you, makes you a more informed observer, not just passively receiving news. So if we boil it down, what are the key takeaways from this deep dive?
What should we really hold on to?
First, I'd say the importance of nuance. It's rarely black and white.
Resist easy labels.
Definitely. BRICS, despite shared goals, has internal tensions, struggles to speak with one voice. G7, historically dominant, faces its own discord and relevance questions. Reality is complex, fluid. Second takeaway, India's sweet spot. It's a powerful lesson in strategic agility.
Navigating multiple relationships.
Without rigid alliances. It shows that in this multipolar world, being nimble, actively engaging all sides, that can yield real geopolitical dividends. It's a model, perhaps, for other emerging powers.
Active engagement, not just passive neutrality.
Precisely. Third, the economic impact. The rise of BRICS, the NDB's focus on local currencies, these signal potential long-term shifts in global finance and trade.
Things that could affect us directly.
Eventually, yes. Trade patterns could change, investment flows might shift, even the influence of major currencies could rebalance over time, affecting everything from currency stability to the cost of your next holiday. And finally, the struggle of these groups, G7 included, to effectively tackle the really big global problems, terrorism, major conflicts.
The consensus challenge.
It underscores the ongoing difficulty of achieving effective global solutions. It highlights the need for new approaches, new forums, or maybe just renewed commitment within existing ones to deal with problems that affect everyone, everywhere.
These aren't distant issues.
No, they impact global security, economic stability, prosperity for all of us. Understanding that challenge helps us appreciate the ongoing search for effective global governance.
So we've covered a lot of ground. The origins, ambitions, internal dynamics of G7 and BRICS, and India's really fascinating role as this bridge builder. It's definitely complex.
Multi-layered, for sure.
But hopefully you, our listener, now have a clearer, maybe more insightful sense of these powerful forces and how they connect, how they're shaping our world.
Which leaves us, perhaps, with one final provocative thought, a question to ponder.
Okay, let's hear it.
As this global landscape keeps shifting, as new powers rise and old alliances adapt, how might the very definition of global leadership change?
Will it stay concentrated or spread out more?
Will it remain in established blocks or diffuse among a more flexible network? And what new clubs, what new groupings might emerge as nations keep searching for collective weight and influence in this increasingly complex world?
Something to think about. What stands out most to you from today's deep dive into these global power blocks?